what does it look like to redefine for ourselves what it means to honor our humanity with little moments to be rather than do, with moments to honor that social connection, to support others and feel supported by them, because so much of burnout is trying to do it all ourselves and never pausing to give ourselves a chance to restore. And if we think about that, as human beings, how we evolved to balance doing with rest, to be in community, to get that support from each other, I think that's really something that can carry us here into the next decade as our world continues to get more complex.
Welcome to Women Who Make It, real conversations with women in the food and beverage industry who are building careers, leading teams, and figuring it all out. After years of building females in food, I've had conversations with some of the most brilliant women in the industry, and they shared the real stuff. The pivots, the boundaries, the burnouts, and the moments of, is this even working, before it finally clicked. So I hit record, and now you get to hear it too. We're Women Who Make It, so let's dig in.
Welcome to Women Who Make It, a Females in Food podcast. Today, we have a very special episode and guest joining us. And instead of focusing on one woman's career journey, like we often do, we're pivoting today to share something a bit bigger. Our first ever State of Women in the Food and Beverage Industry report. I'm Angela Dodd, the CEO and founder of Females in Food. And when I started this community, the mission was clear, and it's still clear, to better understand what's holding women back and to help them advance into senior leadership. From the beginning, we knew that if we wanted to close the gender gap, we would need more than good intentions. We needed data and insights that could drive real change. And I'm so happy that after 6 years of building this community, we finally were able to collect that data and put a report out into the industry so that we can start moving towards progress and change. So earlier this year, we published our first white paper, which you can access in the show notes. But today, I'm sharing the results out loud for the very first time and talking about what the numbers say, what the lived experiences reveal, and what it all means for women in the food and beverage industry. And to help us unpack the human side of these findings, I am joined by special guest Dorsey Standish, a neuroscientist and mindfulness expert who helps leaders build resilience, combat burnout, and find clarity in high-pressure environments. So before we have her come on, I want to talk to you a minute about what the research tells us. I'm a food scientist, after all, so I'm all about let's see the data. Let the numbers tell us the story. And this inaugural survey gathered responses from around 250 women across commercial, technical, and leadership roles in the food and beverage industry. I'm talking specifically about retail, food service, CPG, and suppliers, whether that be ingredient or service providers. Now, on the surface, things looked encouraging. Many women say they felt aligned with their company's values, they feel respected by peers, and most have company policies in place. Flexible work, diversity initiatives, leadership programs that, at least on paper, suggest progress is being made. But when we started to peel back the onion, a very different picture emerged. And beneath the surface, the data exposed 4 urgent challenges that continue to hold women back in our industry. So I'm going to go through some of those, and we're going to start at the first insight, which is leadership development. Companies point to programs they've launched, but women told us a very different story. And that is, too often these programs are one-size-fits-all checkbox initiatives that don't actually address the barriers and unique lived experiences for women. The real problem shows up at what McKinsey has called the broken rung. And that's the first critical step into management, when you go from being an individual contributor into a manager. If leadership development doesn't address that moment through mentorship, sponsorship, advocacy, and practical skills, then it's not actually moving women forward. Now, women in our survey were clear. They definitely don't want theory. They need leadership in practice, real coaching, real advocacy, and real pathways forward. The second theme was work-life balance, which may not be a huge surprise here, but flexible work policies are everywhere. Remote work options, flexible hours, compressed work weeks. But despite all of that, work-life balance was still one of the most cited barriers for advancement for women in the F&B industry. Now we ask, why is that? Because these policies don't always translate into lived experiences. In our survey, only 5% of women said that they had access to paid family leave. Let that soak in. 5%. Now, I think context is pretty important here around how people are answering this question. And having access to paid family leave looks like your employer providing, let's say, 2, 3, 4 months off of paid family leave. Now, this is different than, let's say, a short-term disability insurance, which is what most people have access to when it comes to paid family leave, such as maternity leave after having a baby. For both of my babies, I was given the option to take short-term disability after first depleting all of my vacation, and then was given about 60% of my pay rate for about 6 to 7 weeks. And that's the amount of time that I could take off while still having an income to be home with my baby and mentally, physically, emotionally recover. Now, I was lucky enough that I was able to take unpaid leave for the remaining weeks up until 12 or 14 weeks after both of my babies. But I'm not everybody, right? Like, that was really lucky. And that's not the case for most women or parents or individuals who are having families. And it means that women are going back to work before they're physically, mentally, or emotionally ready to do so, which just adds more complexity into this whole work-life balance equation, right? If we're starting off in these years, if we are choosing to have families, that a lot of times we're not even giving ourselves the best chance at a work-life balance if we're going back before we've even recovered from childbirth. For me, I went back after 3 months, but I would say it was really 6 months before I was really mentally in the game, right? Like I maybe went back to work, but I can't say I was working at full capacity or full mental load at 3 months, especially when I wasn't even sleeping through the night more than 1 or 2 hours at a time. So this data tells us that not only are women going back to the workplace before they're ready, but it also tells us that women are being asked to choose between caregiving and career growth. And that is disheartening in this day and age, as we think about how much progress we've made, but yet how much we still have to go. And then there's culture. So when we think about work-life balance and company culture, even when these policies exist, women told us that they often come with guilt or stigma when they choose to use them. So it's not enough to have flexibility on paper. Companies need to normalize it, encourage it, and make sure both women and men feel that they can use it without penalty. If we want to retain top female talent, especially those in their prime career building years, companies need to build infrastructure around care. That's childcare benefits, that's parental leave, that's elder care, that's support, and a culture that makes work-life balance real and a reality. There's a lot of work to be done here. And the next insight that was revealed through our survey is around company culture. This is where nuance really matters. On one hand, many women say they feel aligned with their company's values and respected by their peers. That's not insignificant, but nearly half also said that they don't always feel truly valued. Respect without value feels like being tolerated and not celebrated. Let's remember that. Respect without value feels like being tolerated and not celebrated. And this shows up in subtle but powerful ways. Who gets credit in the meetings? Whose voice is being heard in decision making? Who is included in the informal networks where influence really happens? Culture isn't just about having an inclusion statement. It's about the everyday behaviors. How feedback is given, who gets recognition, even the tone of jokes or offhand comments, it all matters. One of the simplest, most impactful steps companies could take, according to the women who were surveyed, is equal pay audits. More than half the women in our survey said that this would improve their workplace. Equal pay is not just symbolic, it's measurable proof that women's contributions are valued at the same level as men's. Now, last, before we get into our guest, gender bias and harassment. Truly, this is one topic that I really wish we did not have to address in this day and age. And it's probably the most sobering finding. Nearly half of the women said they experienced gender bias often or very often, and 39% reported facing verbal or physical abuse in the workplace. These aren't outliers. These are systemic realities. They show up in being talked over in meetings, being excluded from projects, receiving lower pay, or in some cases, enduring harassment. The cumulative effect is devastating. It erodes confidence, limits potential, and pushes talented women out of our industry. The takeaway here is simple but urgent. We cannot treat gender bias as an HR issue. It is a business imperative. We need safe reporting mechanisms, transparency around pay, and accountability for bad behavior. And we need men in this conversation as allies, as advocates, as managers, and partners in building better teams. So I know that was a lot. I know there was a lot of insights there, and we're going to unpack all of them. So while at first glance, it might seem like progress is being made, the deeper we look, the more we see urgent work is still ahead of us. And that brings me to today's guest, because one of the biggest threads that ties all of these findings together is burnout. Women are being asked to do more, carry more, and juggle more, and it's taking a toll. So, to help us make sense of both the numbers and the human toll, I'm joined today by Dorsey Standish. Welcome, Dorsey, to the podcast. Before we jump in, I want to share with the audience a little bit about you, and let me brag on you for a minute. So, Dorsey Standish is a mechanical engineer, a neuroscientist, and wellness expert who leads science-based mindfulness and emotional intelligence programs through her company, Mastermind. She has worked with organizations like Staples, Toyota, and American Airlines, helping high performers slow down, manage stress, and build resilience. Me being one of them. She lives in Dallas with her wife and 2 young sons and another baby on the way. And she'll tell us that her best teachers are at home. So welcome, Dorsey, to Women Who Make It. I'm so thrilled to have you on today. As we kick off, and before we start kind of digging into what is burnout, can you tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself and how did you find yourself on this journey of mindfulness, burnout, being a neuroscientist? Tell us more.
Of course, Angela. And thanks so much for having me. Congratulations on the podcast. It's been such a treat to work with your community at Females in Food over the years. And I'm delighted to be here today to talk a little bit about what women can do to combat burnout in the workplace. And let me just start by saying, as you hinted at, I am no stranger to chronic stress and burnout. I always describe myself as a type A person. So very much a box checker, achiever. And early on in my engineering career, when I was at a big tech firm, I totally hit a wall, experienced a mental health crisis, and had to take several months off of work to recover from that. Felt like the worst thing in the world at the time, but looking back was a huge gift and opportunity for me to pause and to think about proactively training my brain for resilience going forward. And so for the past decade, I've been on my own brain health and resilience journey with practices like mindfulness, sleep, nutrition. Gone back to school to get a master's in neuroscience, kind of understand what's happening under the hood in the brain, how stress really impacts us, and then helping other high performers like me figure out how they can slow down, optimize their performance by taking time to be, not just do all the time.
I love that so much. And can we just say, like, who goes back to school for neuroscience? Like, it's one thing to choose that, like, as your primary education and, like, just push through. But, like, how incredible that you were able to go back to school and do that intense of a program to really put the work in and to learn more about the brain so that you could better serve your clients and companies. So when you talk about the brain, I'd love to just, kind of nerd out for a minute on what is going on in the brain. When we talk about burnout, what physiologically is happening in our brain?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Angela. I think sometimes our brain's kind of like a black box. We all have one, we're using it all the time, but we don't actually know what's happening. And that's why during my own burnout recovery, I was so surprised by the huge difference that little practices made. And that's part of what motivated me to, yes, go back to school, even for something challenging like neuroscience, because I was so amazed at the behavioral challenges that that shifts that were happening in my own life. And I wanted to understand, okay, what was that functionally, structurally happening in my brain? And that's what the neuroscience degree helped me understand a little bit better. So when we think about burnout, it's different than just stress, right? So stress is a normal part of life. Oftentimes it can help us grow, especially when it's acute, when it's short term. But when stress becomes chronic and unmanaged, it can lead to burnout, which is really taking things one step further. It's defined by symptoms like emotional exhaustion, like being really cynical, kind of depersonalizing. Oh, what I do, doesn't matter. I can't care anymore. And feeling like that reduced efficacy, like I'm not even sure I have the energy or the ability to make a difference here. And when we experience not just that acute stress, but when it moves into chronic stress and burnout, it actually causes physical changes in the brain. So the first thing we see is reduced gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, which is like the CEO of our brain. It's responsible for decision making, emotion regulation. And we also see increased activity in the amygdala, which is kind of like the smoke detector of the brain, always on alert for threat or challenge and wanting to detect those, put us into that reactive kind of fight or flight survival state. So you can imagine that when somebody is experiencing burnout or chronic stress over a long period of time, they're essentially training their brain to be more in that kind of high stress, overwhelmed state. And they're losing the executive capacity to regulate their stress, to think clearly, to be able to integrate the brain in a way that human beings uniquely can.
So interesting. Is it reversible, would you say?
Yes. So the brain is plastic. One of my favorite terms is neuroplasticity, which just refers to the brain's ability to constantly change in response to its experiences. So our brain today is not the same as our brain tomorrow or 10 years from now. And yes, what we do over and over again shapes our brain. So if we are living in that reactive, overwhelmed, stressed out state, yes, that's going to negatively impact our structure of our brain, the function of our brain. But on the flip side, if we start making these little changes, like I've did in my own life, like I've worked with clients to help them do, those little actions add up over time. In fact, the neuroscientist, Dr. Rick Hansen, talks about even 15 to 20 seconds of an intentional practice, like breathing or gratitude, starts to support those neural pathways for calm, for presence, can help to rewire the brain, kind of like taking the stairs at the office or like doing a couple, weight reps during your Zoom call. It seems like, how does that matter? But over time, we're intentionally training our brains just like we would train our bodies.
I've gotten really into this like habit stacking. So like if I'm, drinking my coffee, I'm stretching my upper body at the same time or something, and putting your shoulders back 10 to 15 seconds. We all have that. And I mean, none of us have a lot of time, but I feel like we all have 10 to 15 seconds to do something different today. I challenge our listeners, take 10 seconds now, push pause, and just breathe. Right? Mm-hmm. I give you permission to do that. Which as we move in, and talking about what can people do, in the workplace, we know burnout is such a big issue for women, specifically in the food and beverage industry. We all have very busy lives. We all have very commanding careers. There's a big changing landscape that everybody is navigating right now. So if you had advice for the women who are currently experiencing that burnout, what are some tools and practices beyond, those 10 or 15 seconds that they could start implementing today for themselves to start changing some of these symptoms that they may be experiencing?
Of course, we can definitely get into some of those specific practices. Before we even do that, I want to frame the conversation in terms of common humanity, which just means that we're not alone. You're not alone to folks listening. So you and I have bonded, like not just professionally, but also with young children. Right now I'm 8 months pregnant as we're recording this. And just knowing that has brought us together and connected us in so many ways. I think that's one of the things you do really well at Females in Food is you bring together women who might be struggling, feeling like I'm doing it all at home, at work. How do I keep this going? and you just get a moment of being seen or acknowledged for what you're doing. And it makes such a big difference. So I hope that we can enter into this conversation with folks knowing they're being seen and appreciated. Everything that you're doing makes a difference. And as a woman juggling all these different things, just know you're more likely to suffer from emotional exhaustion. You're probably caregiving in a lot of different areas. You're more likely to suffer from cognitive overload, thinking about the grocery list, the laundry, the kids, not to mention your high pressure career, right? So in addition to all that, our society puts a lot of pressure on women to do it all, which can further increase our cortisol levels, our stress levels, and it can make us feel like we don't have those 10 to 15 seconds because we have X, Y, and Z to do. And we've put not only the pressure on ourselves, but we feel that externally. So I love that you're starting this conversation and that you already gave women permission to pause and take that time. What's been the most transformative for me personally when I started my journey over 10 years ago was to just do 1 to 2 mindful minutes a day. And that's what I preach to audiences now, especially busy working women, is we all have the same 1,440 minutes a day. So start thinking about chunking your 20-second bits, your 1-minute bits for yourself throughout the day. I love your example of coffee and upper body stretches or habit stacking. But basically, when we think about taking these micro breaks, it's important to understand something that I shared with your community earlier this year, which is that a lot of times we think that when we walk away from the stress, when we close our laptop for the day, when we finally get the last kid to bed, it's like, oh, I should not be stressed anymore, right? But just because we take the stressor away doesn't take away the stress in our bodies. So any little practice we do, we need to think about taking the stress out of the body by completing the stress cycle and signaling to our nervous system that we're safe, that we've successfully kind of fought or fled from that tiger that activated our nervous system. So for those little moments that you take, using tools like the breath, you said 1 deep breath, so simple, so cheesy sometimes.
It's so powerful though.
Big breath, moving the body. I know you and I have talked about walking, even doing walk and talk calls.
Love those.
The way that gets the body moving helps to flush out the stress hormones in the body. So you can take even a 2-minute little dance break to your favorite song to shift your mood during the day. And then finally, social connection, which you do so well at Females in Food, is just finding that common humanity, smiling at someone in the elevator, chatting with your barista when you go get a coffee. But it's really hard for the brain to be in fight or flight when we're casually smiling and chatting with someone, because that signals immediate safety. So seeing if you can program some of these little breaks around the breath, the body, the social connection into your day, and those little minutes of pausing, of flushing out the stress hormones really makes a difference over time.
Yeah, I've been on my own journey in managing the cortisol levels. There's lots of supplements to support the body nowadays, right? Which I think are great. I've been told recently to take some that have helped energy levels and such. But I saw a quote the other day by a doctor that said, you don't need supplements, you need 8 hours of sleep. And I thought that was so fair. But for the parents who are listening, we know I'm just not in the space of 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. I think that is the hardest part for me right now, is keeping those sleep hours uninterrupted by the monitor. But the other point that you made that I just have to comment on is it's real, this human connection. When I stop and take those moments at the grocery store or say, thank you so much, like instead of just like saying thank you in passing as you're turning your back and walking away, to actually stay centered towards somebody and say it to their eyes, to their face, saying, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It catches people off guard. It totally, like, they pause and they look up and they're like, oh, wow, you're so welcome. Or, and I think, one, how unfortunate that is, but two, what a powerful reminder for all of us to actually stop and have that human centered connection in those interactions in a really meaningful way. I'm guilty of it. We don't do it enough. But when I actually get that surprise look from somebody, it's a reminder to me as to how valuable it is every single time and why we need to keep doing it. So I wanted to share that with our listeners. So one of the other areas when we talk about burnout, it's great as individuals. I'm a big component of owning what you have control over. right? And having accountability towards your schedule or how you're balancing your energy, what are you letting in, setting those boundaries. But when we think about the workplace, I'm curious what you've seen work for employers or people maybe advocating for more mindfulness support within the workplace. And would love your take on that.
Yeah, of course. And I think it's so important to think about in a world where, unfortunately, there's so much that so many of us would like to change and shift, that how can I focus in on what's within my purview? What can I actually impact, where I have a sense of agency? And so often that's over the practices we do, how we show up as leaders, whether it's in our home, in our workplace. Taking these moments can have such a positive ripple effect on the folks around us. But it's also important, to your point, to make sure that as women, we're advocating for ourselves in the workplace. And we're making sure that as much as we can, we're fostering an equitable environment where we can succeed, where our needs are being acknowledged and met. And I know that was a big theme in your survey, that sometimes companies have policies maybe on paper, but maybe the lived experience of the women in that workplace is different than what the policies say. And something that works really well for my clients is to think about, and this goes for almost any situation in life, whether you're negotiating with a toddler or your boss, is to think about a win-win situation, right? So being on the same team. At the end of the day, your employer wants you to be successful. It's going to have, if you are happy and well and engaged, you are going to have a positive impact on your organization. So rather than trying to solve it in isolation or feel like it's just up to me to get through this, which a lot of women do, me included, I'm just going to figure this out by myself. Think about, how can I invite my boss, my team, my peers into this conversation so we can be on the same team to advocate together for the best solution. So for example, say you're like so many of my clients and you realize you have 32 hours of meetings in your 40-hour work week. You're like, I can't do this. Rather than going to your boss and saying, oh my gosh, I have so many meetings, I can't do anything, say, how are we defining my success? And then kind of agreeing on that, and then saying, okay, well, here's what my calendar looks like. How do you think we could carve out more time for me to work directly toward those objectives, right? So kind of level setting what the most important parts of your role are, and then making sure that you have buy-in from your team to help you actually get there, whether that's the flexible times that you're talking about to be able to show up for your family, whether that's that lunch break where you actually get to go to a 30-minute exercise class or take that walk and stretch. But I think that bringing people into the conversation, you brought up the idea of humanity earlier. Most people want to support women in the workplace, and they might even think they are, and they just aren't realizing what it's like to be a working woman, to be a mom, and balancing all these different things. So as much as we can give them help in seeing us as human beings, being on our team, seeing everything on our plate, and then working together to figure out what's the best way to tackle this issue and get the win-win outcome of me doing my best at this role and supporting, I think, is a great way to shift the conversation. And that might be things like executive coaching. It might be things like having you join Females in Food so you can feel that common humanity and support and get that professional development, but inviting them into the conversation and letting them be an advocate for you on your team.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the plug as well. That was not not planted. I appreciate that. And you made a really good point on so much of that. It was all a good point. But I'm guilty of it. Like before I had kids, I did not recognize or appreciate the load that people were carrying, right? And conceptually, I understood it. I had sisters that have had children, right? But like day to day, like I had not gone through that yet, and I had not experienced what that load truly feels like. And to compound that with not sleeping and not having the right nutrition or whatever it is, fully taking care of yourself in those wellness, how challenging that can be on so many levels for people, and having that understanding or compassion for what people are going through in the workplace. I sincerely apologize to all those people I interacted with from ages like 25 to 36. I have a whole different degree of respect for
Right.
the load that we're all carrying. So thank you for your thoughts on that and just sharing your perspectives and how real burnout is and the real physiological things that are happening inside our body. It's not make believe, right? It's not in our mind. It's not in our minds. There's real lasting effects of what people are experiencing. But there are things that we can start doing both for ourselves and in the workplaces, right? To start changing that conversation and the reality for all of us. I'm wondering, as we close out, what am I missing here? Is there any other advice you want to share with our listeners? That's my first question for you. But then second, where can our listeners find you?
Thank you for the opportunity to close out, Angela. It's funny. I've shared that my journey, it started with these 1 to 2 minutes of mindfulness a day. And it's been like this amazing snowball effect that it sounds like you're on this journey as well of habit stacking and figuring out, oh my gosh, I can add on a little stretch and I feel better. And my wellness and brain health has been growing. And I'm so grateful that I get to share that with other people, busy working professionals, and also with my family. And I think, as we sit here in 2025, we can't ignore how our world continues to accelerate and get more complex, whether it's technology or things happening in the world. And I would just encourage folks to think about, what does it mean to be human in 2025? Because everything we're talking about, even that comment the doctor's saying, like, supplements are great, but get 8 hours of sleep, like reaching for your phone to get an inspirational quote on Instagram to feel better is great. And you have your breath right here inside of you. You have that person next to you on the elevator that's probably experienced some stress in their life. They might even need a smile right now, to your point of like, they might need you to say hi. What does it look like to redefine for ourselves what it means to honor our humanity with little moments to be rather than do, with moments to honor that social connection, to support others and feel supported by them? Because so much of burnout is trying to do it all ourselves and never pausing to give ourselves a chance to restore. And if we think about that, as human beings, how we evolved to balance doing with rest, to be in community, to get that support from each other, I think that's really something that can carry us here into the next decade as our world continues to get more complex. So I'd love to chat with folks more. You can find me on LinkedIn, Dorsey Standish, and my company, Mastermind Meditate. I also just recently did a TEDx talk over the summer on a related topic around this idea of humanity, exploring the impact of cell phones on the birth rate decline.
Oh my gosh. This is so fascinating. I was going to ask, we don't even have enough time to dig into this, but like, I so wanted to dig into this for our listeners on that entire topic. I really encourage people to go watch that TEDx talk. Tell them where they can find it. Tell us a snippet of it, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. The title is Scrolling the New Sex, which is provocative and has gotten some views and engagement because of that. But cell phones and the birth rate decline. So if you put in Dorsey scrolling TEDx or something on Google, it should direct you to it pretty quickly. But it was really fun and also kind of horrifying to look at all the research on how our relationships are being impacted, how we're not having as many babies, and our world is changing so fast. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's more important than ever that we are intentional and that we recommit to that idea of humanity, which is what I hope people will get from the talk.
I love that. Recommit to humanity as a great takeaway there. And for me, it resonates so deeply because every time I get together with people in person, whether through the community or friends, I'm like, gosh, I really love this. And it always comes right at a time when I need it most. So I think that's a great takeaway and great reminder for everybody listening. Well, in closing, I want to thank you again, Dorsey, for sharing your perspectives, your insights, your energy with us here today. And I want to thank our listeners for listening to Women Who Make It. If this conversation sparked something for you, hit follow and leave us a quick review. It truly helps us reach more women who need honest, real talk and practical tools. We'd also love for you to share this episode with friends or colleagues. And join us on Instagram or LinkedIn, femalesandfood.community, for more stories, insights, and resources. And of course, we invite you to join our community. We're not just making food, we're making moves. We're women who make it. See you next time.